Scarlett, a person like you doesn't deserve to call me Mom. That's what my mother said after I refused to bail my younger brother out at the police station. What happened? Let me walk you through the story and tell you what I went through. Hello everyone, my name is Scarlett. I'm 30 years old and living in Chicago. I'm a graphic designer, a job that demands talent and a lot of persistence. For the past few years, I've been living like a machine. Working from 9 to 6 was just the part people could see. The real grind happened during those long nights in front of the computer screen. Eyes bloodshot, hands trembling from too much caffeine, polishing every last detail of a project. Then, one afternoon in late October 2023, my boss Richard called me into his office as the golden fall sunlight streamed through the windows. Richard, a 50-year-old man who rarely smiled, was different that day. When I walked in, he stood up with a rare look of satisfaction and said, "Scarlett, I've got some amazing news. The company has decided to promote you to Senior Creative Director. Your salary will increase to $120,000 a year. On top of that, you're getting a $100,000 bonus for everything you've contributed over the past 6 years." As soon as Richard finished speaking, my entire world seemed to pause. In that moment, all of those sleepless nights, all the times I turned down friends' invitations, the rushed breakfasts, and the late dinners felt worth it. This was proof that all my sacrifices hadn't been in vain. This was the ticket to the dream I'd held on to since the first day I set foot in Chicago, owning a home in the city. Over the past 6 years, I'd managed to save a pretty decent amount, and I also invested in stocks. When I heard about the extra $100,000 bonus, I knew that dream was about to come true. During the first week after receiving the good news, I spent all my free time researching Chicago's real estate market. Every evening after work, instead of working on freelance design projects like usual, I opened my laptop and scrolled through hundreds of listings on real estate websites. Chicago offered many options, from charming historic homes in Lincoln Park to sleek modern townhouses in River North. But I wanted something special, a place that truly reflected my achievements. After carefully reviewing my finances, I realized I could afford to spend around $450,000 on my first home. On the first weekend of November, I started going to open houses. Sarah Martinez, a dynamic 40-year-old real estate agent with 15 years of experience in the field, joined me. As we stood in front of the first home in the Lakeview neighborhood, Sarah turned to me with a professional smile and said, "Scarlett, this area is hot right now. Home prices here have gone up 15% in the past year." Right then, I realized that buying a house wasn't just about finding a place to live. It was also a significant investment for the future. Over the next 2 weeks, we viewed more than 20 different houses. Some were too small for what I had in mind. Some were too old and needed major renovations, and some were beautiful but way over budget. By the third week of November, as the Chicago wind began to carry the chill of winter, Sarah called me unusually excitedly. When I picked up, she said, "Scarlett, I found an amazing house in Albany Park. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a garage, and a backyard. It's listed at $340,000. Still within your budget, and the neighborhood is growing fast." As soon as I heard her words, I knew this was the house I'd been looking for. And at that price, I'd even have room in the budget to renovate and decorate it exactly how I wanted. And just 1 month later, I finalized the purchase of that house. After finalizing my house purchase, I decided to visit my family and share the good news. On the drive from Chicago to the suburbs, I brought a box of pastries from my mom's favorite bakery, hoping it would make the evening a little more special. As soon as I got to the house, I headed straight to the kitchen to start dinner. I decided to make pasta carbonara, a dish everyone in the family loved, and I opened a bottle of red wine that my dad rarely enjoyed. As the food scents started filling the house, Mom walked into the kitchen with a curious look and asked, "Scarlett, why are you cooking tonight? Is there something special going on?" I turned around with a mysterious smile and replied, "Just wanted the whole family to sit together. It's been a while since we had a warm dinner like this." I looked at each familiar face when everyone gathered around the dinner table. Dad Daniel sat at the head of the table looking unusually relaxed. Mom Nancy smiled in approval at the nicely plated dishes. Blake watched me with curious eyes. After raising my glass and taking a small sip of wine to build courage, I looked them all in the eyes and announced, "I have some great news to share. I just bought my first home in Chicago." Right then, the air in the room seemed to freeze. Instead of the congratulations I had hoped for, Dad adjusted his glasses and said with concern, "A house in Chicago? That sounds expensive, sweetheart. I'm worried you might be spending beyond your means." Immediately after, Mom sighed and added, clearly displeased, "Scarlett, I get that you want your own life, but did it ever occur to you to use that money to help the family? This roof needs urgent repairs, and Blake still needs support for college." Before I could respond, Blake jumped into the conversation, eyes lit up, and said, "A new house? That's awesome, Scarlett. I'm going to stay for a few days. I want a taste of that fancy lifestyle. I'll take some pictures for Instagram. My friends will be so jealous." Mom nodded in agreement and added, "Exactly, Scarlett. A new house should be shared with family. I think you should let Blake move in with you." At that moment, I clenched my glass so tightly that my knuckles turned white, trying to keep a smile on my face while an empty feeling spread through my chest. It hit me sharp and painful. Not one said, "Congratulations." No one expressed pride or joy over the biggest accomplishment of my life. All they cared about was how they could benefit from my success. On the drive home, childhood memories flooded in like a slow-motion movie. I remembered my first year of college when my old laptop started breaking down. The screen had these weird lines across it, and the keyboard would randomly stop working. I sat down with my parents and asked for help getting a new laptop, which was essential for my studies. As I explained the situation and asked for support, Dad looked at me over his glasses and said, "Scarlett, you need to learn how to save money. If you want a new laptop, save up and buy it yourself." I felt disappointed, but I tried to understand where he was coming from. But just a few months later, my parents gave Blake, who was only 12 then, a brand new gaming console for no special reason. I can still remember Blake's joyful laughter as he opened the box. I stood in the corner of the room, watching the whole scene unfold, feeling like someone had just punched me in the gut. Moments like that became familiar. I got used to stepping back, figuring things out independently, and sacrificing without complaint. Phrases like, "Scarlett's the older one. She needs to set an example," or "a daughter should be more independent," became the standard response anytime I needed something. Tired of watching that unfairness play out, I moved into the college dorms. I still remember the night I sat with my parents to discuss it. After building my courage, I looked them in the eyes and said, "I want to move into the dorms. It'll be more convenient for school, and I want to try living independently." Almost strangely, Dad looked at me calmly and replied, "If that's what you want, we won't stop you. But don't expect any help from us. You'll be completely responsible for that choice." After he spoke, Mom just nodded in agreement without saying a word. Their reaction didn't surprise me, but this strange emptiness was still pressing down on my chest. They didn't argue, protest, or even try to talk me out of it. They accepted my decision effortlessly, like my leaving didn't matter. In that moment, I understood something clearly. To them, I was just a burden they were ready to let go of. The next day, I packed up my possessions, the few possessions I owned, and moved into the dorms. It wasn't a luxurious or comfortable space, but at least it gave me a sense of freedom. I no longer had to witness Blake being spoiled or carry the weight of their expectations anymore. Life in the dorms wasn't easy, especially since I chose to work while studying to cover my expenses. During the day, I rushed from one class to another, and at night, I worked at a coffee shop near campus. Some nights, even after finishing my shift at 11 p.m., I had to return to my room and dive into assignments to meet deadlines. My parents called occasionally, but the conversations were always short and superficial. Their questions only revolved around school. No one asked if I was tired or how I managed life alone. Whenever I hung up, the distance between me and my family grew wider, like we were only staying connected out of obligation. I hoped they'd check in on me or offer to help, but that never happened. I learned to stop expecting that kind of care. Instead, I focused on my goals and reminded myself that I was building my future, even if I had to do it without them by my side. The day I graduated from college was a significant milestone in my life. After years of juggling classes and work, staying up late to meet deadlines, and working part-time to cover rent, I finally did it. Not long after, I landed my first job at a graphic design firm with a decent salary, enough to pay rent and start putting some money aside. What surprised me was how my parents suddenly seemed more interested in my life once I started working. They began calling more often, inviting me home for dinner. Family meals became more frequent, and for a while I genuinely enjoyed those brief moments of connection. But before long, the conversations at the dinner table started to shift. One evening, Mom looked at me with concern and said, "Scarlett, the roof needs repairs and we don't have enough money. Can you help us out a little? I immediately realized their sudden interest had a specific reason behind it. Even though I still carried a heavy feeling inside, I believed helping them wasn't just an act of support, but also a way to show gratitude. I didn't do it out of pressure or obligation. I chose to do it because I wanted to hold on to my sense of kindness and ensure the past didn't harden the person I was trying to become. When Blake started college, everything suddenly seemed to revolve around making his life as comfortable as possible. One evening, during a family dinner, my parents suggested that Blake needed a car to get around more easily. While I was enjoying my plate of pasta, Dad suddenly turned to me and said, "Scarlett, could you buy a car for Blake? Something around $3,000. Doesn't have to be anything fancy." I nearly choked on my food. I had taken the bus to school for all 4 years of college, enduring freezing Chicago mornings and overcrowded rides. And now they were asking me to buy Blake a car like it was just a given, and somehow my responsibility. When I voiced my disagreement, Mom jumped in with a scolding tone. "Scarlett, you're his older sister. You should help him. Blake needs support, and the family doesn't have the money to cover it." Faced with such an unreasonable request, I sighed and tried to explain that a car was beyond what I could afford at the time, and that I had responsibilities of my own to handle. But my refusal didn't end the conversation. My parents began criticizing me, calling me selfish, and accusing me of not caring about the family. No matter how I tried to explain, their opinion didn't change. After days of thinking it over, I decided to support Blake in a way that felt more reasonable to me. I bought him a new laptop, something I knew he needed for school. When I gave him the laptop, I hoped Blake would understand that this was how I showed I cared about his education and future. Blake seemed genuinely grateful when he received the gift, but my parents still weren't entirely satisfied with my decision. That's when I realized that no matter what I did, I would always fall short of their expectations. But at least I had chosen to help in a way that aligned with what I believed was right. As I was still lost in the stream of memories, I suddenly realized I had driven home without even noticing. After parking the car, I entered that familiar space, my house, where I always felt the most at peace. In the following days, I poured my energy into decorating every corner of the home. From choosing curtains that complemented the natural light to picking out minimalist artwork for the walls, I wanted this space to be an accurate reflection of who I was. The house gradually became my favorite place, a quiet refuge in a busy neighborhood. But that peace didn't last long. Blake started texting me constantly, sometimes multiple times a day, with messages like, "When are you going to show me the new house?" Or, "Are you being stingy with me? Scared I'll mess it up?" Those texts made me laugh a little, leaving me feeling slightly drained. Maybe Blake was just curious, but the way he kept pressing felt like a subtle pressure I didn't ask for. Instead of replying immediately, I put my phone aside and returned to hanging up a few more decorations. I reminded myself, this is my space, and I have the right to decide who gets to be part of it. After days of receiving texts from Blake and repeated requests from my parents, I realized that constantly saying no wasn't getting me anywhere. Eventually, I decided to host a small get-together at my house to ease tensions with the family, while setting clear boundaries about my personal space. That evening, when Blake stepped inside, he shouted excitedly, "Wow, this place is even nicer than I imagined. Scarlett, you're living the high life." Mom looked around, her eyes scanning every detail. Even though she seemed impressed, she didn't miss the chance to comment, "Why didn't you get a bigger dining table? If you have guests over, there won't be enough seats." I just smiled, trying to keep the mood light. The small gathering went relatively smoothly, but I couldn't ignore the curious glances from my parents or Blake's over-the-top enthusiasm as he explored every corner of the house. Blake kept marveling at everything, touching the furniture like he was assessing how much this space could benefit him. He was especially drawn to the spacious living room and the entertainment area. When everyone finally left, I felt a sense of relief. I thought I had fulfilled my duty and hoped it would satisfy them. At that moment, I had no idea that letting Blake see the house would turn into a decision I'd regret. One Saturday, not long after my parents and Blake visited, I came home from a long day at work, looking forward to peace in my own space. But as I approached my front door, I heard loud music blasting down the block. My heart started racing when I realized the noise was coming from inside my house. I opened the door and was immediately hit by chaos. Blake and his friends were laughing, drinking beer, and blasting music at an unbearable level. Snack wrappers, empty beer cans, and plastic cups were scattered everywhere. I froze, trying to suppress the wave of anger rising inside me. As soon as Blake saw me, he turned around with a wide grin, as if nothing was wrong, and said, "Hey, Scarlett, my friends wanted to check out your awesome house. I figured it'd be fine." It felt like I'd just been slapped. He spoke like his actions were no big deal, but all I could feel was blatant disrespect. I tried to hold back, but my voice cracked with frustration as I shouted, "This isn't your house, and it's not a place for you to throw parties. Everyone needs to leave now." Reluctantly, Blake and his friends began cleaning up and heading out, after I mentioned calling the police. But as I closed the door behind them, a tightness and fury grew in my chest. Right then and there, I knew this wasn't over, and I needed to take firm action to protect my space. Furious over what Blake had done, I called my parents that night. I hoped they would listen, maybe even take my side, or at the very least, scold Blake so he'd understand that his behavior was completely out of line. As soon as Mom answered, I kept my voice steady and said, "Mom, I need to talk about something." Blake entered my house without permission and threw a party with his friends. I can't accept that kind of behavior. I waited, expecting an apology or at least some kind of sympathy. But instead, Mom scolded, "Scarlett, can't you be more generous with your brother? He's just a kid trying to have a little fun. The way you're acting makes you sound selfish." Right after that, Dad chimed in with a firm voice. "I agree. You live alone. You've got more than Blake ever has, but you refuse to share. You're disappointing us. You only think about yourself and never about the family." I was stunned into silence. They didn't acknowledge the hard work I had put into building my own life, nor did they even mention that what Blake did was wrong. Overwhelmed, I said, "This is my house, and I get to decide who's allowed in. If it happens again, I won't hesitate to call the police." There was a pause on the line, and then Mom sighed deeply and said, "You're heartless, Scarlett. You have no sense of family." With that, I hung up, hands trembling with anger, not just at Blake, but at the blatant favoritism and the constant pressure my parents had always put on me. That was also the moment I decided to protect my boundaries, even if it meant enduring harsh criticism from my own family. 2 weeks after the incident, my parents called and invited me over for dinner. Mom's voice was softer, like she was trying to ease the tension between me and the family. When I picked up, she spoke gently. "Scarlett, why don't you come home for dinner this weekend? We'll cook all your favorite dishes." I took a deep breath and responded calmly. "Sorry, Mom, but I must travel for work this weekend. Things have been hectic lately. Let's plan for another time." She sighed with a faint tone of disappointment, but didn't push any further. After hanging up, I told myself I'd made the right decision by declining. In the following days, I stayed entirely focused on my business trip. The packed schedule from early morning to late at night left no room to think about anything else. On Saturday evening, my phone rang just after finishing an important meeting and heading back to the hotel. It was an unknown number. The serious voice on the other end made my skin crawl when I answered. "Hello, this is the Chicago Police Department. We need you to return immediately. There's been an incident at your residence." Trying to stay calm, though I couldn't hide the worry in my voice, I asked, "What happened? Who's at my house?" The officer continued, "Your brother? Blake, correct? According to reports, he threw a large party with his friends. Neighbors complained about the noise. A fight broke out between Blake and one of them. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured, but the situation got out of control." Hearing those words, I felt like the ground dropped out from under me. Despite my previous warning, Blake had again found his way into my house. This time, he didn't just invade my personal space, he dragged the neighbors into the chaos too. I was overwhelmed with anger and disappointment. I thanked the officer, promised to return immediately, and hung up. Sitting in the hotel room, I gripped my phone tightly, torn between emotions. I blamed myself for not being more careful about securing my home, and now I was paying the price for that oversight. I knew I couldn't let this go on. Blake had crossed every line, and I was determined to take firm action this time. There would be no more compromise. Even as my parents kept calling and texting, urging me to return immediately and deal with the situation, I chose not to rush. This trip was important, and Blake needed to face the consequences of his actions. When I called the police back and informed them I'd be delayed, I spoke firmly over the phone. Let this be a lesson for my brother. At that moment, I let Blake handle the fallout on his own. After finishing my work, I took the earliest flight back to Chicago, exhausted and unable to relax. My mind was weighed down by the mess waiting for me. When I arrived at the police station, they led me to an interrogation room. Blake was already there, sitting with a face that showed zero remorse. When he saw me, he smirked and said, "You've got such a nice house, and you're not even using it to its full potential. What's the harm in me using it?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I took a deep breath to hide my anger and replied, "It's not your house. You have no right to use it, let alone throw a party and drag the neighbors into your mess." A few seconds later, the officer beside me shook his head and added, "We questioned him earlier, and he claimed the house was his to avoid taking responsibility. But we've confirmed that you're the legal owner." Hearing that felt like a direct hit to my dignity. Blake hadn't just violated my personal space, he had shamelessly lied to dodge accountability. When I turned toward Mom, sitting next to Blake, she looked at me pleadingly and said, "Scarlett, you have to help your brother with this. He's still young. He doesn't understand. If you don't help him, who will?" I laughed bitterly and replied with thinly veiled sarcasm, "Right, Mom. Blake is young, but that doesn't mean he gets a free pass from consequences. I warned everyone, but no one listened. My parents kept trying to persuade me, attempting to shift the responsibility onto me like they always had. But this time I was ready. This time I wasn't backing down. A moment later, I looked Blake straight in the eye and said clearly, "You're going to face the consequences of your actions. I'm not paying a single cent to clean up your mess." Then I turned to the officer and said, "You can proceed however necessary. I have no intention of dropping any charges." The air in the room turned heavy. My mom looked at me like I had just committed an unforgivable sin, but I didn't care anymore. This was my final boundary, and I wouldn't let it be crossed again. With a serious expression, the officer laid a file on the table and looked me in the eye. "We've reviewed the situation. Given Blake and his friend's actions, public disturbance, and a physical altercation with neighbors, we're obligated to impose appropriate penalties." As the officer spoke, I saw a flicker of worry flash across Blake's face. Seconds later, he flipped a few pages and continued, "Blake will be fined for disturbing the peace and causing a public nuisance. In addition, the affected neighbors have decided to file a formal complaint. We cannot overlook this matter. It will be referred to court for proper legal proceedings." Immediately, Mom cut in with a panicked voice. "Officer, he's just a kid. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. Please don't make this more serious than it has to be." The officer shook his head and replied, "Ma'am, this isn't a minor issue. Everyone must be accountable for their actions, whether child or adult. This will be an important lesson." I sat silently watching everything unfold. The tension was undeniable, but I deeply agreed with the officer's decision. Blake had gone too far, and things would only worsen if he didn't face the consequences now. Finally, the officer turned to me and said, "Ms. Scarlett, we'll complete the paperwork and send you an official notice. I appreciate your cooperation." I nodded and responded calmly but resolutely, "Thank you, officer. I believe this is necessary for my brother to understand the importance of owning up to his actions." With that decision, it felt like I had finally shut the last door leading back to the painful parts of my past. After the police informed us that Blake would be held until someone posted bail, my parents sprang into action. Even though they didn't have enough money, they began calling relatives and friends to borrow what they needed. I stood silently off to the side, saying nothing. I had warned them before, and I wouldn't change my decision. When Blake was finally released and the family left the station, my parents' fury erupted in the parking lot. Mom shouted, tears streaming down her face, "Scarlett, how could you be so heartless? Your brother was in trouble and you didn't lift a finger to help. Do you even consider us family anymore?" Then, just as furious, Dad yelled, "You only care about yourself. You always think you're right. Blake is still young. When he makes mistakes, he needs guidance, not rejection. How could you turn your back on your brother like that?" I stood there, trying to keep my emotions in check while disappointment boiled beneath the surface. I replied calmly but with a weariness in my voice that was impossible to miss. "I warned everyone. I allowed Blake to learn from his mistakes, but no one listened. Now you're blaming me, but you've been enabling him all along. This cycle will never end if Blake isn't held accountable." Immediately, Mom stomped her foot, eyes blazing with rage, and snapped, "Scarlett, someone like you doesn't deserve to call me Mom. When your family needed you, all you did was walk away." I gave a bitter laugh. Realizing there was nothing I could say that would ever be enough, I looked at her and said, "If being family means I have to keep tolerating this kind of injustice, then maybe I need to rethink what that word means." The tension escalated to the point where no one could even look each other in the eye. I turned and walked away, leaving behind my mother's accusations and my father's angry stare. As I got into my car and drove off, I knew this relationship had reached its breaking point and would never return to how it used to be. When I returned home and opened the door, a wave of emotion hit me instantly. The scene was a disaster. Empty beer bottles, trash scattered everywhere, overturned furniture, and mysterious stains on the floor and the sofa. The space I once considered my sanctuary now looked like a battlefield. I stood still for a few minutes, overwhelmed by a mix of rage and exhaustion. I couldn't bear to leave the house in that state any longer, so I immediately called an emergency cleaning service. When the cleaners arrived that night, I sat quietly in a corner, watching as they tried to restore what was left of my living space. Once everything was clean again, I sank into the sofa. The dim glow of the lamp made the room look calm, but inside I felt nothing but chaos. I closed my eyes, but the images of everything that had happened kept flashing. For years, I worked tirelessly, believing that if I pushed myself harder and achieved more, my parents would love me more and finally acknowledge everything I had done. But reality proved me wrong. Blake could make mistake after mistake and be forgiven instantly. Meanwhile, I was branded as selfish and cold-hearted when I stood up to protect my boundaries. I felt sad, disappointed, and above all, empty. But I also realized that I couldn't keep hoping for love and recognition from my parents to appear magically if I just tried harder. The only thing I could control was living according to my values and maintaining firm boundaries. I took a deep breath and decided I would deal with the mess Blake created. This time I'd offer support to help him settle debts or address the issues with the people involved. But after that, I would never allow him in again unless he was invited. The next morning, I woke up early, and the first thing I did was reach out to the neighbors who had to endure the chaos caused by the party. I knocked on the door of the house next door, which seemed to have been affected the most. A middle-aged man answered, his face lined with frustration. When he opened the door, I introduced myself. I'm Scarlett, the house owner next door. I sincerely apologize for everything my younger brother and his friends did. I want to make this right and gladly compensate for any damage or disturbance your family endured. The man folded his arms and replied coldly, an apology isn't enough. My family didn't just lose sleep. You think a simple sorry or a bit of money can fix this? I've made my decision. I'm taking Blake and his friends to court. Hearing that, a heavy weight pressed on my chest, but I stayed calm and said, I understand your frustration. If there's anything I can do to support you, I'm willing to cooperate. I'm not making excuses for his actions by Betrayal. I genuinely want to make things right. If possible, I'd like to take responsibility on his behalf and resolve this without dragging it into a legal battle. The conversation went on for over 20 minutes. At first, he was firm in his decision, but fortunately, he eventually softened. He agreed not to proceed with the lawsuit on the condition that Blake and his friends apologize in person and cover all repair or compensation costs. By the end of the conversation, he said, I'm giving you this chance, but if they don't follow through, I won't back down next time. I nodded and thanked him sincerely before leaving. After convincing the neighbor to change his mind, I felt a small sense of relief. Still, I knew I couldn't handle everything alone. Blake and his friends needed to take responsibility for what they had done, and the first step was for them to apologize. I picked up my phone and called Mom first. The phone rang for a long time, but no one answered. I tried calling Dad and then Blake, but got the same result. They didn't pick up or respond to any of my calls. I sighed, guessing they were still angry at me for refusing to bail Blake out at the station. I wasn't surprised, but being ignored like this still left a bitter taste in my mouth. With no other option, I left a message for each of them. I just spoke with the neighbor. They agreed not to sue Blake and his friends, but only if Blake and the group apologize in person. I've done everything possible to resolve this, but the rest is on Blake now. Please call or text me as soon as possible. I set the phone down, my chest heavy. Even though I had done everything in my power, it still felt like I was walking a tightrope alone. While the situation seemed momentarily under control, I knew problems like this would continue unless Blake took responsibility and made a fundamental change. The next day, after a long day at work, I sank into the sofa, savoring the peace in my now clean home. I closed my eyes, trying to relax, when a sudden knock at the door made me sit up. Opening the door, I saw the neighbor from yesterday standing there, a gentle smile on his usually stern face. As soon as he saw me, he greeted me. Hi, Scarlett. I wanted to share something with you. I invited him in, feeling a mix of curiosity and concern. Sitting across from me, he began explaining. Blake came by this morning to apologize, along with your parents. They explained that Blake's friends refused to cooperate, but at least he owned up to what happened and made an effort to make things right. I've decided to let it go because you went above and beyond to handle it responsibly. Hearing that made me feel relieved, though I couldn't fully relax yet. I thanked him for his understanding and willingness to forgive. But before I could say anything else, he smiled unexpectedly and added, "My family's having a small dinner this weekend. If you're free, I'd love to invite you." He paused, then chuckled slightly. "Oh, and by the way, I'd like to introduce you to my sister. She just moved to the area, and I think you two might get along." His invitation caught me off guard, but pleasantly so. After all the tension and chaos I had just been through, the thought of a warm dinner with new people sounded incredibly appealing. I replied with a soft smile, "Thank you. I'll rearrange my schedule and be there." For the first time in days, I felt things were finally starting to shift positively. And I realized that sometimes when one door closes, it opens the way to paths you never imagined. After everything that had happened, I understood that the cycle would only continue if I didn't take steps to protect myself. So I immediately ensured this home became my private safe space. The next day, I called a trusted locksmith and asked him to replace every lock in the house. When he arrived, I stayed nearby, watching every step as he worked, feeling a little more relieved with each old lock he removed. When the job was done, he handed me a brand new set of keys. Holding them in my hand, I told myself, from now on, I'm truly in control of this space. It's been 2 years since that day, and I still haven't seen my family. We haven't spoken, no calls, no messages. That silence hurt at first, but I realized it was necessary over time. I needed distance to start healing the wounds inside me. Since then, my life has changed completely. I've learned how to live for myself without needing to prove anything or sacrifice myself for anyone else. My career has flourished. I was promoted to creative director and now have a stable income. My house is now truly a home. I've decorated it exactly the way I want, welcomed friends over, and thoroughly enjoyed the peace I once had to fight so hard to protect. Now and then, I still wonder if my parents and Blake are doing okay, if they're happy. But I also understand that not every relationship is meant to be saved. Sometimes letting go is the kindest thing you can do for yourself. I've learned that family isn't just about shared blood. True family is made up of those who choose to stand by you, who respect you, and who love you unconditionally. Sitting in the home I fought to protect, with a heart no longer weighed down like before, I realized that sometimes finding true happiness means having the courage to walk away from the things hurting you. I'm sharing this story for anyone going through something similar, those who feel overlooked, pressured, or taken advantage of by their family. You're not alone in that struggle. Setting boundaries with family can be the hardest thing you'll ever do, but sometimes it's also the most necessary. No one has the right to take advantage of your kindness, not even the people closest to you. True happiness comes from living in alignment with your values, not trying to please those who never truly appreciated you. If you're in a similar situation, remember, you deserve to be respected and loved. Don't be afraid to say no to unreasonable demands, even if they come from your family. Your life is yours. Live it in a way that makes you proud. That's the end of my story. But before I go, I want to ask you, those of you who've stayed with me until the very last words, have you ever experienced favoritism in your family? What would you do if you were in my shoes? Feel free to share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to support me. Take care and see you next time.